ground war in Europe. Friday marks 1 year since Russia invaded Ukraine.
1 year ago, the world was bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Well, I just come from a visit to Kyiv, and I can report Kyiv stands strong.
Despite all the predictions to the contrary,
after 12 days, it's already clear that Putin has made a miscalculation. He has underestimated the Ukrainians, their heroic resistance. He's underestimated their leader. And he has underestimated the unity of the West.
And predictions that, if it happened, it wouldn't last long.
I see no tendency in war dragging on for 2, 3, 4 years if Ukraine keeps getting weapons on time.
The war has cost thousands of lives, Ukrainian and Russian, displaced millions of civilians, and done untold damage to the Ukrainian economy.
8 months into Russia's own provoked, unjustified war against Ukraine, the deaths, displacements, and destruction continue.
But it's also had profound effects on the global economy and on investors around the world. As the price of oil spiked and remains elevated,
gas prices will remain very high, and it also may result in some disruption.
And its effects on the global food supply chain, and grain in particular, are still being felt.
We're calling on all countries to refrain from banning food exports or hoarding grain while so many people are suffering.
While Western sanctions against Russia have upended trade and financial relations around the world.
Russia's economy is in a great deal of pain because of the sanctions that we've implemented with 30 other countries, and the pain is going to continue for years to come.
All of which raises questions about what comes next and whether there can ever be a return to normal. And to give us a sense of what the shift in geopolitics has meant for investors and business around the world, not just for the last year with Ukraine, but over the next several years, we turn to somebody who knows geopolitics like no one else. He's Tom Donilon. He served, of course, as National Security Advisor to President Obama. So, Tom, thank you so much for being with us. First of all, give us a sense. What do you think has been shifted more or less permanently in geopolitics because of this Russian invasion?
Yeah, thank you, David. It's good to be with you. And I think there have been some changes which are durable. And thanks for the opportunity to step back here and consider what the changes are. Of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was the most important security event in Europe since World War II. But beyond it being a regional security event, David, as you alluded to, it has had durable and global impact. And I see that first in geopolitics. We can talk about energy and deglobalization and things like that. But if you start with just the geopolitics, I'd say this. It has exacerbated, it has propelled, it's accelerated fragmentation among the important countries in the world, the important regions in the world. And it's caused, I think, the emergence of geopolitical and economic blocs in the world, which are competing with one another. And you can see that if you try to just think about a map of the world, right? The first block, if you think about three or four blocks, is the West, the United States, the G7, which have come together in a very cohesive way to support the effort in Ukraine against the Russian invasion. Indeed, I think the numbers now are that the West has provided Ukraine with around 145 billion euros of support, led principally by the United States. And that, of course, has resulted in a real division between the West and Russia, which I think is a durable and for all intents and purposes, for a semi-permanent division between the West and Russia. I think over the long term, no matter how long it takes for the war in Ukraine to come to some sort of stable place or settlement, which I think is a long-term event, right? I think you'll see a fundamental division down the middle of Europe between Russia and the West across multiple dimensions: military, political, cultural, economic, right, ideological, and I think that's for the long term. I think that's a fundamental impact, if you will, of Russia separating from the West over its invasion of Ukraine. The second, I think, dynamic is the coming together in what I think is an increasingly durable partnership between Russia and China. You see it in terms of their alignment strategically against the United States. You see it in the increased economic relationship that they have, where the relationship has really developed quite substantially beginning in 2014, but really accelerated with the Russian invasion. You see it across all kinds of dimensions, by the way. You see it in the energy dimension, you see it in the goods dimension, you see it in the technology dimension. And that's a fundamental change. As I said, I think they're strategically aligned in terms of their opposition to the United States and the West. And I think that Putin and Xi Jinping have a personal relationship, which has driven this as well. There's one here to watch, because this really has, in addition to driving a split with Russia, which is obvious, it's also been driving and exacerbating tensions with China between the United States, Europe, the West on one hand, and China on the other hand, over China's support for Russia. One thing to watch, I think, for investors and those studying the geopolitics of this is this issue, which has arisen over the last couple of days, raised quite directly by Secretary of State Tony Blinken, as to whether or not China is supplying lethal military assistance to Russia. If that comes to be established as a fact, that's a major event. That's a market-moving event, because the United States and the West will react quite dramatically, I think, to that. So you've got Europe, Russia, China, and the last is a large group of countries in the world. In the Cold War, we would have called them the kind of unaligned movement, the global South. I prefer them now as multi-aligned countries, and they're the countries over which there's a lot of competition between Russia and China on the one hand, and the United States and the West on the other hand. So bottom line, I think, we can go on to other topics, is that there has been a dramatic acceleration, I think, and deepening of fragmentation in the world, which, I'll finish up on this, has really adversely affected international cooperation. If you think back to 2009 with the great financial crisis in London at the G20 meeting, where I worked with President Obama, you had the Russian Federation, China, and the United States sitting down at the same table trying to develop an approach to the global financial crisis, trying to bring the world back from the abyss. You couldn't ever imagine, David, that meeting taking place today.
So, Tom, listening to all that, it's fascinating and comprehensive. As an investor, what I hear is risk and geopolitical risk in particular creeping in to really reduce a lot of my returns. Is it all risk, or is there also opportunity, do you see?
All this opportunity, I think, but it is important, I think, to understand that geopolitics, in ways that wasn't the case, right? I think wasn't the case really before the dynamics really were driven by COVID, by the Russian invasion, by these repeated shocks to the system, but especially the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I do think that any analysis, right, with respect to investing, has to take into account now geopolitics in ways that you might not have before. Energy is a good example of that, David, right? You know, where if you look at the energy situation right now, geopolitics has really kind of come back to the fore with respect to energy dynamics. And you have geopolitical dynamics as opposed to markets and efficiencies and economics driving a lot of these energy flows and relationships, right? You see the politicization, the weaponization of energy, right? You see, I think, significant government interventions in the energy markets as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and a number of these crises. You see winners and losers, right? You know, the United States has become a very important exporter in terms of supporting our allies, especially in Europe. You see Russia dramatically diminished, I think, over time. The International Energy Administration Agency, right, has said that Russia will be a much diminished energy power over the next decade. And you see in the short term here, maybe for some period of time, real transfers of wealth to the Middle East. The IMF estimates that $1.3 trillion in additional revenues will go into the Gulf oil-producing countries between now and 2026. So I guess the bottom line there is that your lens now, in terms of analysis and investing, and your risk analysis has to take into account geopolitics in ways that you really didn't have to do, I think, during the golden age of globalization.
So, Tom, I'm curious about, I'll call it the rest of the world that you described, not the West, Russia, China, but the rest of the world, and particularly some of the big players, India, Indonesia, Brazil, countries like that. Do we have a sense of whether this geopolitical conflict is bringing them closer to the West or farther away from the West, or are they still deciding?
I think there's competition, right, between over this. Also, I think you also see that the global South and the countries you mentioned are not as deeply involved, if you will, in the Russia-Ukraine situation as the West and the United States are. They've been affected, by the way. They've been affected by the effects on inflation, by the effects on energy prices specifically, by energy flows, food prices. They've been affected by this, by the dynamics in Europe, but obviously are not as directly involved. And of course, I think what you do see is that these countries trying to manage their way to protect their interests, right, as between these two significant blocks of countries. And you see the competition all over the world right now. And you see it's a competition. It's over economics. It's over values, right? It's over geopolitics. It's over security. And I think it's really kind of come to the fore how expressed this competition is and how these countries, right, kind of outside the core of the West, are having to navigate and kind of protect and seek to advance their interests.